Hey everyone, welcome back to Shop Life. This video is probably going to be really long. We might have to split it up into a couple parts, but we are finally showing you guys how to tackle the whole Vanos system on the S54. We're going to be doing the Vanos bolts for the sprockets. We're also going to be doing the Vanos seals and also the Vanos rattle repair kit. This involves retiming the engine, or not really retiming, but keeping the timing properly and making sure you put all the hubs and everything back together correctly so that way you don't screw up the timing. So right off the bat, if you are a beginner and you haven't really ever messed with the internals of an engine or anything like this, just use this video as a informational video. Do not use this as a DIY. This is something I usually don't recommend DIYing because there are a lot of ways that you can screw something up. If you drop something into the engine, you're pretty much screwed. If you don't do the timing right, if you're really off, you can really screw up the actual engine itself by hitting one of the valves. There's so much stuff that can go wrong with this. So just use this video as informational if you're not comfortable with what you're doing. I usually don't say anything like that, because the purpose of DIY is so you can do it yourself. And I try to make my videos so that anybody can do it. But this one in particular, these engines are not that cheap to begin with. So if something goes wrong, you're gonna have a pretty costly mistake. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the video. I've got all my parts from Beisan Systems, however you're gonna say it. You can go look on their website. They even have actually a full written up procedure on how to do all of their Vanos stuff with part numbers of tools that you might need, with everything that you need. They have a really good DIY that's written up and that shows how to utilize all of their stuff. For doing the Vanos rattle repair kit, you are gonna need some of their specialty tools. You're also going to need, their seals, their rattle repair kit, and you are gonna need a timing tool. A lot of people make these at home by themselves, which you can if you really wanted to, but it's not gonna be as precise as an actual timing tool. You can buy it directly from BMW. There's also a couple of aftermarket brands that make them as well. The one that I usually use is made by Schwaben, and I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong, but they work really well. I haven't had any issues with them, and yeah, let's get to the video. So for me, I've already got a few things already taken off. The valve cover is off. The whole Vanos solenoid pack with the valve body, that's already pulled off. The fan clutch on here was actually seized, so I ended up just taking off the blades and the shroud so I have more space. And I've already set the engine at TDC, which is top dead center. So in order to do that, you have to turn your crankshaft pulley. So either you're gonna have a 32mm hex bolt, or you're gonna have 4 external Torx bolts. And in that case, you can use like a 36mm 12-point socket if you don't have the specialty socket for that, which the specialty socket made by BMW has 4 holes to go over all 4 of those E-Torx bolts. This fan clutch is really seized on here. I've used a pneumatic tool, I've used everything to try to pull it off. It does not want to come off, so I ended up having to remove just the fan. And that ordeal itself took quite a while. So, things like this you always run into whenever you're going to do a DIY. You can't really be 100% sure what you're going to expect. This is something I did not expect, and I pretty much wasted a few hours just pulling the fan off. So that's something that, that's starting right off the bat, and that is probably going to be the least tedious thing that we're going to have to do. The whole Vanos stuff, depending on what you find, is going to be really tedious. All the procedures you have to actually follow right to the T. This is something that you do want to use all the torque values and stuff because it is internal. So make sure you have somewhat of a torque wrench that's pretty accurate or whatnot, especially if you haven't done this before. I mean, I've done this enough times that I know pretty much by hand where all the torque values are, how tight it needs to be, but still it does help to have a real torque wrench so you can, actually have everything exact. So like I said, we've already pulled off the whole Vanos solenoid pack, valve covers off. You are going to need a bunch of crush washers and stuff, so make sure you get all that. I'll try to link as many of the parts down below as I can. Another thing that commonly is overlooked is the upper timing chain guide rail. So that's actually right here. And usually once you start doing this whole Vanos stuff, after you start pulling some of the stuff off, you'll see that usually they crack at the very top. Beisan Systems, they have an upgraded one. I think it's made out of some poly material, and that pretty much gets replaced whenever you have to take it off to do the work anyways. So yeah, but one thing for sure, you are going to need that timing tool. It actually sits on top of the valve cover. It makes sure the camshafts don't move, and you also have the pin that goes on top of the crankshaft to keep everything TDC. And you're gonna need a bunch of towels. You're gonna need picks, all kinds of stuff to get some of those O-rings out. And you don't want oil going on your lower radiator hose, so make sure you have that as well. And this will also be a good time to do your valve adjustment. So I do have videos on the whole Vanos solenoid stuff. I've got videos on replacing the valve cover gasket. To get to this step, I have a video on doing the water pump, which shows how to remove the whole fan shroud and everything. So make sure you go check all those out to get to where I'm at right now. All right, so first things first, we have the engine set at TDC. The actual pointer thing is pointing at the number 1, which is kind of hard to show, but you'll see there's 3 letters on that actual wheel right behind the crank pulley, or on the crank pulley itself. And there's like a little pointer with an arrow on it, and you want that arrow to point at 1. And when you do that, when you have it set up, that the timing pin should go right in through that hole, right onto that crankshaft pulley to make sure it's locked in. All right, so first things first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna retard the timing on the camshafts. So when we retard the timing on the camshafts, we should be able to have access to those spline shafts, which you'll see here in a little bit. But first, in order to retard the timing, or retard the camshafts, I'm probably saying it not 100% properly, but you guys get the idea.
Oh my god, that's just better.
All right, so to retard the camshaft, you wanna turn it counterclockwise. And if it's getting stuck, you want to just rotate it back and forth, and it should just keep seizing that, if there's any oil pressure still in there, it'll squirt out from the oil accumulator right here, which is why you want to put towels down here. So let's try going counterclockwise. So I've actually turned the intake camshaft counterclockwise already, and you can see how the spline, or the splines are starting to show right here, right in this gap. Alright, so once you have fully retarded the camshafts, the 2 holes will be facing straight up. They should be like in line parallel to the valve cover, or to the head right here. So here's the timing tool that I was talking about. We're just going to see if they're both even. So what we're going to do is you're going to put this bridge right on the bottom. It comes with a pin. You're going to stick the pin through here into the hole. See if it goes in. Bam. And you can only do 1 pin at a time. Once you put the pin in, you want to make sure that both sides of the bridge are touching the head, or wherever the valve cover mates to the head right here. Alright, so you're going to do 1 pin at a time. So that side's good. And this side's good. Now we're going to remove this upper camshaft chain guide. It's held in with 2 5mm hex bolts. Now whenever you're doing anything over here, you're going to be very careful as to not drop anything into the engine. So this is where it would be handy to have magnets and stuff. There's 1 bolt. There we go. With the guy out of the way, that takes out the 2 bolts for the Vanos bracket on this side. Now you want to remove these 2 bolts for the Vanos bracket. You can also stuff like paper towels and stuff in right here. That way nothing falls into the cavities. You can put like shop towels or microfiber rags or anything like that. Something that doesn't leave lint. And you want to remember the orientation of this Vanos bracket. And you just lift up, pull it out. Now I'm going to remove this oil accumulator line. It's going to be a 14mm banjo bolt right here. There's a washer on the top and another washer on the bottom. So make sure you don't drop either one of those. And you are going to be replacing these crush washers. Now you want to remove the rest of this pipe. There's a 10mm bolt right here that you want to take out. For the oil accumulator pipe, there's also another bolt on the bottom. It's also a 10mm bolt. You're just going to have to look for it. It's underneath the lower radiator hose. Just follow the pipe down and you'll see an external Torx bolt right near it as well. Here's the bolt. It's a 10mm bolt. With that off, now you should be able to move this accumulator pipe out of the way. Now that the pipe is out of the way, we're going to actually remove the Vanos mounting bolts so that we can pull off the Vanos a little bit so we have access to those spline shafts. A good tip right here is you're going to want to get 2 of those long bolts that were attached from this oil accumulator to the whole Vanos solenoid valve body. The two really long ones, that way we can put them on the edge right here. So that way the Vanos is not hanging by the spline shafts, but it still has two bolts holding it in place. So first, let's go ahead and pull it off. Just have those two bolts handy. So there's one 10 right here. We already took off the other 10 from the other corner. And the other ones are all hex. And they are 5mm hex. There's 3 of them. Now here are 2 of the long bolts from the solenoid removal. I'm just going to thread in a couple threads. Now you want to pull this off. So you can use like a putty knife or something to pry along these edges, but just make sure that you don't mar up any of the surfaces. So there are 2 dowels on each corner, like you can see poking out right now. Alright, so now we've got it pulled out and it's resting on these bolts. Now you can see the splined shafts. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use a 7mm and a 10mm open-ended wrench to get these pistons off of those shafts. So here's a 10mm, and you want to hold the spline shaft with the 7, and these are left-hand thread, so you want to turn it clockwise to loosen. Now you want to do the same thing on the exhaust side. And this is also left-hand thread. With both of those disconnected, you should be able to push the actual piston back into the Vanos. You don't want to push it, but you should be able to just move it around. That way it's off of the threads. Now we can remove the whole accumulator. Just pull off these 2 bolts. Alright, so now we've brought this whole Vanos assembly, oil accumulator, whatever you want to call it, right out onto this doggy diaper so it absorbs all the fluids. You would ideally want to work on like a workbench or something, wherever if you drop something it's not going to get damaged, just in case you drop something. Here's the gasket. We're not going to be reusing this. You should have a new one. And now we can see the oil pump disc right here, which we are going to be replacing with the Beisan Systems one, which basically all it is, it's the OEM disc, but they've re-drilled 2 holes that are a smaller diameter than this. As you can see, this is where the exhaust hub tabs have been making contact right here in this hole. That's why there, you can see the little groove on there. Part of the reason that the exhaust hub tabs break, as well as some of the Vanos noise you get, is because these holes are a little bit too big. They allow those exhaust hub tabs to move around in there, even though the engine should be theoretically spinning only one way, but there's still enough play in there that it does chatter and it does eventually shear off. So the 2 new holes that are drilled, they're pretty much at a 90-degree angle, exactly the same length apart or whatnot, but the holes have a smaller diameter. That way there's a lot less play in between. So that should help from the exhaust hub tabs not shearing off. With that being said, we are going to be replacing the oil pump disc. We're also going to be replacing all the Vanos seals right in here, and even the seal on this and on the inside of that as well. So to begin, let's remove this snap ring from this oil pump disc. Now there's a little spacer right here as well. And now you can actually see the oil pump disc right here with its retainer, and there's also a radial ring right here, radial bearing. So the bearing we're not going to be removing, but we are going to be removing this oil pump disc as well as that holder right there. So in order to do that, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can hit it on the side of your table so it can just pop off, or just find somewhere else where you can hit it, but you do want to cover this section. So put some kind of plastic bag or something. That way all these caps that are going to fly out, there are springs inside as well. You don't want all that stuff flying around everywhere. Oh, there it goes. And there is the oil pump disc. Just be careful because all those caps are going to go flying. So here's the outer ring. Here's the cap. There's a spring in each cap. Alright, so now in each one of these orifices, wherever the cap and spring was sitting, there's this small cup that the spring sits on. So you want to remove each one of these. Just use a pick, slide the pick on there, and then it should just come out attached to it. And just note how the orientation is, that when we're reassembling that you can remember. Should have a total of 4 of them. And now this oil pump disc, you are going to have to return to Beisan Systems as your core. Now you want to go ahead and clean up this whole housing where the oil pump disc sits. Now here is the Beisan Systems oil pump disc, and we've got the 2 smaller holes. We should be good to go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put all those caps and everything back in here. So this is the orientation. That goes in like that. Alright, so as you saw, you have to compress all 4 of those caps with the springs and then get it to sit back into this carrier for the bearing. And now what you want to do is you want to put some oil on here or assembly lube, whatever you like. Just get it on there before we put it back inside. So once you have it pushed in, it should spin freely. There we go. Now we can put the washer in. And finally the snap ring goes right on top. And double check, make sure everything spins freely. And we're good. With this section complete, now we can actually go on to remove and replace the Vanos seals.